Welcome to Relationship Equity, a podcast that explores how successful people cultivate meaningful connections with others in their personal and professional lives. Learn from the stories, insights, and advice of leaders, innovators, and influencers who have built strong bonds with their teams, their customers, their communities, and their families. Here's Richard Walker.
I'm joined by Sandra Matz, who's a professor at Columbia Business School and the author of the new book Mindmasters, which provides the data-driven science of predicting and changing human behavior. So Sandra, as humans, we make quick decisions on how we feel about another person. Since we've never met before, what would you glean from my appearance?
Let me just describe what I think you look like, and then people can guess. And then I'm going to do the big reveal of what you actually look like. I would say it kind of suggests that you're a kind of funny best buddy. You don't take yourself too seriously. Kind of also suggests, I think, some humility. Those are the adjectives that I would go with. So let that sink in for a second, and then I'm going to reveal what Richard actually looks like.
Well, I'm not sure about the humility part. My wife would say that does not fit my profile, but I appreciate the very quick psychoanalysis of Richard Walker. People that know me would say that he's different. So anyway, we'll shelve that for a second. But
Okay, now I have to tell the listeners what I'm looking at.
Okay.
So I'm looking at Richard in a Hello Kitty T-shirt with a Santa Claus hat. I would argue it's a fashion statement. And obviously Hello Kitty is also a Santa.
There you
Santa
go.
on the kitty, so not to be missed.
Thank you very much. It is specifically a Hello Kitty Santa. Now, I will tell you, before we get into the meat of what I want to chat with you about today, the little story behind this, because people always ask, why Hello Kitty? Now, I'll show you my phone case as well. It's Hello Kitty. Now, this is my 7th Hello Kitty phone case, Sandra, and everything I own is Hello Kitty. My license plate and my vehicle is Hello Kitty. So there's a story behind it, and I'll tell you this because I think it will help you understand kind of who I am and why I do what I do. My work is about people. I've been in the technology business for 30 years, but technology is just part of it. It's really about people and human dynamics, which is why I'm excited to speak with you today with the research that you've done, because I'm fascinated by people. But as it relates to Hello Kitty, so my young daughter, she's 23 now, and when she was a little girl, she loved Hello Kitty. Now, you say you have a child that's 6 now. Is it a daughter? Is it a boy or a girl?
Boy, he's 10 months old, so.
I remember those days well. Naturally, no, I don't remember him very well. It's a long time ago now for me. But to my young daughter, so I'll try and summarize his story in just a couple of minutes. She loved Hello Kitty, then she became a cool teenager, and she switched from Hello Kitty to Justin Bieber. It was kind of heartbreaking. Took all the Hello Kitty stuff down her room, put Justin Bieber pictures up, stopped holding my hand when I took her to school. It was heartbreaking. Fast forward a bunch of years, and we were looking at schools for our son in California. And I needed a new phone case. I had a brand new phone, and I saw a Hello Kitty phone case. And I said, Allison, I think I'll buy that. She said, Dad, if you buy that, I'll never talk to you again. So I did it to spite her. And then it blew up from there.
And it's so funny because Hello Kitty is actually one of the examples that I use in the book as an example for how don't judge a book by its cover. So I think a lot of the observations that we make about people, right, as you said, are snap observations. We see someone and we immediately infer who we think that person is. And one of the stories that I love is I think the person who has the biggest Hello Kitty collection in the world, I would have assumed it's like a young Asian girl, but it turns out to be, I think it's a retired 67-year-old police officer somewhere in Japan. So again, it's not the assumption that you would make when you hear like huge Hello Kitty collection. So voila, you're not the only one.
Well, I thank you for telling me that. I can't wait to read your book. I've not read it yet, and I didn't know Hello Kitty was part of it. It's coincidental. And now you've given me something to shoot for because I want to be the biggest Hello Kitty collector in the world. I've got so many.
I've seen pictures and it's a lot.
Okay.
I think you'll have to work hard.
Challenge accepted. Let's learn about you, Sandra. I always want to know who the people are that I'm speaking with, especially given that we don't know each other. I want to understand your upbringing, where you grew up, and then your story, what's led you to your fascination, and it looks like almost obsession about human dynamics and why people do what they do and say what they say.
It's interesting because I think if we kind of start talking about the book later on, you'll see that the narrative comes back because I actually start the book with my experience growing up. So I grew up in a tiny, tiny village in the southwest corner of Germany. It's beautiful. It's in a Black Forest, so very close to France and Switzerland. And it was a village of 500 people, incredibly small community. What I remember from growing up is that there was constantly someone who was in my business all the time, right? So like the neighbors knew everything about me. They knew what I was doing on the weekend, who I was dating, which music I was into. You dye your hair and they think you have an early teenager crisis. So on some level, that was actually amazing, because it's like a community, right? There's support. If you talk about relationship, those are people who really know you. You go to the local doctor, you see him like every year. They know exactly not just like your symptoms and the illnesses that you've gone through, but they know everything about your family, your lifestyle, and so on. And it's incredibly personalized. So it really feels like you're going back to a friend. It's interesting because my doctor back in the village is one of the people that I sent the first copy of my books to. So it kind of tells you something about the relationship that we had in the village. But at the same time, it's also really annoying because people were in your business all the time, whether you like it or not, right? But they're trying to push you in certain directions. They're trying to get you to date guy A, but you really want to date guy B. So this is like this funny village dynamic that I think I was struggling a little bit as a teenager, which also meant that once I could leave, once I was done with high school, I traveled around the world for a year because I was just curious to see what else was out there, and then embarked on a journey of studying psychology. So for me, it was just super interesting to learn something about human behavior, learn something about how the mind works, and very quickly got into this somewhat of a new discipline when I was doing that like 10 years ago, of trying to understand human behavior and the human mind through data. So instead of asking you questions in a questionnaire and trying to understand the way that you describe yourself, is really trying to look at all of the traces that you leave as you interact with technology. So this is like a little bit of my journey. Came from this tiny village, did my undergrad and PhD studies and graduate studies in psychology, and then moved to New York, where I'm a professor now. So it's taken me all the way from this tiny village to one of the biggest cities in the world.
So it must be like from the moon to Mars. And believe me, I can relate because I grew up in a small town in northern England, a bit bigger than yours, but exactly the same thing. And so I can very much relate to your story. You know, the place I grew up in is a beautiful little town, and everybody knew each other. And you know, I'm obviously a lot older than you, so back then you were supposed to stay in that town, get married there, you know, hook up with somebody else's wife, get divorced, and that was just the cycle. And I, like you, wanted to break that cycle, so I can very much relate to your road that you've been on. Let me ask you one quick side question before we get into the real meat. What was your favorite year? The year you took off to travel, what was the favorite place that you visited?
I mean, there were a lot of favorite places. I think actually the lesson that I learned is next time I would do it shorter and only visit fewer places, because it was at some point almost became overwhelming because you went one beautiful place to the next, and like the 20th beautiful beach, which would have blown my mind at the beginning of the trip, I think was just, oh, it's great, like another one. But I think the place that during that period I liked the most was probably Thailand. Love the people, I love the food. There was like a small place in the south of Thailand, which was amazing for rock climbing. So I spent a lot more time there than I had initially planned.
You know, it's funny that what you just said there. The first thing you said, and it wasn't something that you thought about when you said it. The first thing you said about why you love Thailand is you love the people. And this world is about people, right? It's not just about physical places and what we have and what we do. It's about people. The whole world revolves around people. And in any given day, we wear different hats as a person. I wear a hat as a father, as a husband, as a CEO of a company, as a friend. And depending on any given circumstance, my brain adjusts accordingly. And that's what's fascinating to me. And I'm really intrigued to learn about your research that you've done on psychological targeting, because it's, why don't you give us your definition of, a lot of people want to have heard the term psychological targeting. So what does that mean?
So I usually have that definition prepared, and I'm going to give you that in a second, but I'm this time going to build on what you just said. So I think you said it's about understanding people, adjusting to people, building these relationships with people. And that's something that came very naturally in the village, right? Because you spend time with people, you get to know them, you observe their behavior, you see what they do, you talk to them. So you get like a pretty intimate insight into their preferences, motivations, needs, and so on and so forth. Now, once we transition to like the digital space, right, the online world, a lot of this got lost because
Right.
suddenly we're like a number in the system. Like when we interacted with products online or services online, they didn't really know us, right? So we kind of go on a telehealth service. It's not the doctor in the village because they've not seen me before. They have no idea what I want, let alone what my aspirations, fears, hopes, and dreams are. And so for me, this was like a pretty big step that was in a way kind of taking away the foundation of what makes us human and what kind of builds these social relationships. So the way that I think of psychological targeting, and again, we're probably going to get into what are some of the benefits and some of the big ethical
Yeah.
challenges, but it's really trying to see, can we take someone's data? So the same way that my village neighbors observed me running to the bus in the morning and they figured out that I'm not the most organized person, I can now just tap into your social media profiles. I can look at your credit card spending. I can tap into the fact like you have your smartphone with you pretty much 24/7, right? That gives me a good sense of where you live, where you go, who you meet, because that's two phones showing up in the same location repeatedly. So the same observations that my neighbors made back in the village, computers can now make just by looking at our data. And they're incredibly good at putting these pieces together. So once I get access to your social media profile, I can not only see what you talk about, right? You may talk about vacation, you might talk about friends and so on, but I can actually translate these traces into psychological dimensions. So something like your personality. Are you more extroverted or more introverted? Are you more neurotic or emotionally stable? I can predict your political ideology, sexual orientation, your level of income. So there's like dimensions that I think, like, again, thinking back to the village, stuff that I would not have wanted to disclose to my neighbors. And that's the step one of psychological targeting. The second part also directly relates to, I think, my experience in the village, which is once I know your psychological makeup, right? Once I know your, again, needs, preferences, motivations, I can tap into those psychological traits and then use it to try and change your behavior. So my village neighbors, they were not just in the business of poking around in my private life, they were trying to change it, right? So they were trying, again, to influence who I was dating and so on and so forth. And this is like something that we can now do at scale. So we can predict people's psychological traits from data, and then we can use it to potentially change their behavior. And that could be anything from, I can get you to spend more money on product if I can tap into your psychology. But at the same time, I could also help you to save more by trying to speak to the motivations and the things that drive you. So that's kind of how I think about psychological targeting along these two dimensions.
Now, you threw a word in there early on, the ethical component to this. And obviously, there'll be a lot of people that say, that's not ethical, or I don't like that you're doing psychological targeting. What would be your response to that?
I think it's a very good comment. And so I think the same way, and I'm curious to hear about your experience in the village as well, but I think I didn't like that in the village, right? So the reason for why I left, and the one thing that would make it hard for me coming back, is that I never felt fully in control of my life. And I think I minded less the fact that there was someone who could peek into my psychology, but I still like ethical challenges that I can talk about in a second. For me, it was always a question of being in charge of my own choices. And the same is true. I think that's one of the big ethical challenges that I see in the online space as well, is there's someone who can tap into my psychology and make it more or less likely that I buy a certain product, that I vote for a certain candidate, that I buy life insurance if I don't need it. Then suddenly we lose control over our life and the choices that we make. So it's not just privacy that I think is at risk here. It's also like agency and self-determination. So for me, that's one of the biggest risk factors. So if someone says, hold on a second, it's great to understand people and to build these relationships, it's very different than in the village, right? Because in the village, it was bidirectional. It was mutual. So you learn something about me, I learned something about you, and then we use it to influence each other. In this case, in the online space, usually just big companies collect all of the data and then they try to influence you. And you have no way of kind of knowing the same stuff about them.
Influencing. It's interesting. The human brain, how we think. How easy do you think it is to influence somebody and maybe change their opinion or change their views on any given subject by using there's certain methods and strategies to do so?
It's a great question, and I think there's a pretty wide spectrum. So if you that was always something that frustrated me by how psychological targeting is depicted in the media. It was always either it's a magical warfare tool, right? Think of Cambridge Analytica as like someone can peek into your psychology and then use it to change the outcome of the presidential election. Now, I don't think it's a magical warfare tool, right? It's like you're not going to change someone's core identity just by tapping into their psychology and then showing them one ad that is tailored and customized. That's not how it's like if you couldn't do it in an offline context, you're probably also not able to do it in an online context. The problem is that most of the time you don't need to shift someone's core identity, right? Most of the time, like elections, for example, are usually won by a tiny margin of people who are undecided. So all you need is give them a little push to go out and vote for the candidate that maybe they were thinking about but weren't quite sure. I think this was the same in the village, right? They didn't really change who I was at the core, but they certainly made some of the paths more likely for me to walk on than others. And the same is true for psychological targeting. And then obviously, if you do this repeatedly, then it also becomes more powerful, right? Because then it's like exposure after exposure after exposure, and your view on some of the other stuff that's out there just becomes more and more limited.
In the corporate world, well, not just the corporate world, but we all talk about teamwork. I mean, that's been talked about since day one, is effective teams, how people work together, and how people think and how they're motivated, how they're driven, can often impact the outcome of any given team, whether it's in sports or in the corporate world. Yeah, I've seen some teams do incredible things, and if you look at their backgrounds, if you look at their experiences, you would say, how the hell did they do that? That team can't possibly pull. I'll just tell you. Let me tell you a little story, Sandra. We have a program called the Emerging Talent Program, which is absolutely, truly incredible. And I can say that because I didn't create it. In fact, frankly, we all have biases, whether they're outward biases or subconscious biases. And I had a subconscious bias that we couldn't pull this off, and God, was I wrong. So this program that we have, we bring people in through a non-traditional path to come and work for York as software engineers. And the vast majority, they do not have any kind of computer science or STEM related degree. In fact, a lot of people don't even have degrees. And what we've been able to pull off is very different than the traditional way of evaluating talent. The traditional way is we look at people's backgrounds. We look at what they've accomplished, which is usually indicative of what they're going to do next. Not always, and we'll talk about this because really want to get your opinion on this with predictability of human behavior. But we always look at what they've done in the past, which makes sense. But there's so many people that did not go through, for a lot of reasons, a lot of it's financial, did not go through the traditional American college system because it's so damn expensive, which precludes them from truly achieving what they're capable of doing. So we created an alternative pathway now. Now we use an AI tool that we created, that we built, and we've tweaked this thing. Bear with me because I think you'll be fascinated by this. The first part of the screening process, it is very objective. What we do, we don't know who people are. We don't know their backgrounds. We don't know their education, nothing. What this tool does is evaluates their technical acuity and natural problem solving skills, regardless of what they've done in the past. Now that's the first point. The people who get through that first screening, the next part's really interesting, because in order to be successful, in my opinion, based on my 30 years of experience in the IT world, is you have to have the technical ability first and foremost. Then you have to have the drive and the grit to be able to really achieve what you're capable of. And people talk about soft skills. Well, that's the biggest misnomer, in my opinion, that there could possibly be. Soft skills are very hard. Communication skills and interpersonal skills. Now, I want to ask you as well, I'm throwing a lot at you, what your opinion is of the difference between communication skills and interpersonal skills, because the complexity of what makes somebody successful is fascinating to me. So we bring people through this program. I get back to where I first started, because some of the teams that we put together, you would look at their backgrounds, like I said, and say, not a chance. I liken it to the 1918, you probably don't even know this because you're very young, but the 1980 ice hockey team, American team that played against the Russians in the Olympics, they were a bunch of college kids playing against professionals. On paper, you wouldn't have given them a chance in hell, but they won. And why did they win? because the coach got every ounce of talent out of them, and they worked together, very much together as a team, and they had such a massive drive to win, and they did. And that same concept to me applies in the business world. If you put the right teams together, magic happens. So I threw a lot at you there, so I'd love to get your feedback.
It's so funny, because it's a topic that I care a lot about, and I think I've spent we started in 2017, so yeah, almost like 7.5 years, working with a startup in Australia. They're called Hatch, and their mission is exactly that. So their mission is saying, how do we get away from CVs? How do we get away from like which university did you attend, which degree did you do, to something that gives opportunities to a lot more people, right? Because you might be brilliant, you might be, as you said, like you might be able to do the job. So I always think about, can you do the job? And then more importantly, are you willing to walk the extra mile? And for that, you don't need a CV, right? So it's very difficult to get that from a CV, because maybe what you get is, well, was that person privileged enough to be able to spend their summers doing internships that are unpaid? Well, yeah, that's both maybe drive, but it's probably also a sign that you were just in a good spot. Because if your parents can't afford that, you're not going to be able to do all of these unpaid internships. So we were also the same way that you're describing, essentially using technology and AI to create these conversation partners, ask the right questions, have them go through a process that, first of all, is blind, right? So it's not that someone, like a person, looks at your CV and looks at all of the puzzle pieces. So we separate the puzzle pieces and we evaluate each of them separately. So there's like the least bias that you can get in the entire process. And it's trying to do exactly what you said. So someone can come from a background that is, let's say, my favorite example is actually during COVID. What they did is, because so many people were laid off in like the hospitality industry, right? Like airlines were struggling, theme parks were struggling. So what they did is they said, well, actually, like the people who are kind of the stewardesses, the flight attendants, they have amazing interpersonal
Right.
and communication skills. Why don't we actually kind of set them up with a government in Australia so that they can run the hotlines for COVID? Because that's probably what we need, right? So we need people on the phone that can reassure the people calling who are probably just worried about everything. So they said, well, of course, like a flight attendant was never necessarily meant to be in a customer call center for like a pandemic, but they have like very similar skills. So that's like how we've been thinking about this. And I 100% agree, because what you do then is you focus on the person and you don't focus on, again, which universities I went to, which degree they got. So 100% with you. And the communication, interpersonal skills is an interesting distinction, because I do think you can be an excellent communicator, right? You can be very persuasive, you can be very charming as a communicator, and you can have absolutely terrible interpersonal skills when it comes to perspective taking, when it comes to empathy, when it comes to compassion. So I do think you need some communication skills to do that, but I think it's a necessary condition, not sufficient.
I love that feedback. You know, in my not so humble opinion, there are far more people in this world that will not achieve what they're capable of doing than people that actually do, for a lot of complicated, sociological reasons. And we're trying to break that. Now, we're in the technology field, so everybody that we hire is for a technology role. Now, if you look at technology, there's two very wide ends of the spectrum. One, really people in the field that have very strong communication to personal skills and not that strong technically. And, they're in project management type of roles and scrum master roles, and ones where their interpersonal skills and their management skills and organizational skills are of paramount importance. And the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who are highly, highly technical, and they're in those kind of roles. We hire both, and we test when we do, I hate the word test, but we evaluate people's skills across the board. And then what we'll do is we will slot them into roles where their natural talents are and what they want to do. And the results have been incredible. We've hired hundreds of people through this method, and it's exciting. But think about a world where it's not just, we're in the technology field, but across the board, with any kind of professional role, a corporate role that people can go into based on a different system. Because right now, in my not so humble opinion, the education system is broken. It just is. And we've got young adult kids that have been through it. In fact, our daughter, ironically, has 3 master's degrees from Columbia, and it's broken not in terms of how how the education system works now, in my opinion, it's how it precludes people from achieving what they're capable of, because society judges people based on a lot of different things, and education is a big part of it. Well, we've blown that up because we've proven hundreds of times that you don't have to have a PhD from Columbia to have a successful career. However, there's bias. And that's the biggest thing that we are trying to combat right now, is to take bias away. Now, can you completely take it away? No, because we're not making our decisions 100% based on the use of technology. It's an important component of it. There's still a human element to it, because we have to make sure that when people pass these evaluations that we put them through, there's a 2-week follow-on from that to make sure they have the grit and perseverance to actually do what the system says they're capable of doing. So it's still very, very complicated.
Yeah, it just reminds me that when I started my PhD, I actually wanted to do something totally different than what I ended up doing. What I wanted to do was build this magical machine, like predictive machine, that takes an existing team. So like you have an organization, you know what the function, the role is that the organization is trying to hire for, and you also know all of the team members, and it spits out that perfect profile. Again, forget about degrees and forget about which university. I wanted to have like here's the skills, here's the characteristics, the values that we would need to complement the team. Because you don't, the way that we hire right now is you hire who's the best person. And who's the best person obviously depends on, as you said, what's the job, right? I don't need the most outgoing kind of communicative extrovert if it's like a hardcore coding and you don't get to talk to anyone during most of your days. Job. It's much better to have someone who enjoys the comfort of their own company. And the same is true for teams, right? You don't hire a person into a role, into a vacuum. You hire them into an existing team, and whoever might thrive in that team could be totally different from team A to team B, even if it's exactly the same role and job description. I was reading a lot about this, and it's such a hard problem. And there's so many factors, which makes it super interesting. So I think actually now you got me excited to see if I can go back. But I was like, I'm never going to finish in 3 years. If that's my goal, it depends on the team size, what's the industry, right? If it's something that requires more innovation versus more kind of deployment and implementation. But I thought it was like a fascinating question. Do you actually know about the Peter Principle? Have you heard of it just popped up in my mind. Do you know what it is? I think you'd like it.
Yes, but I've forgotten though.
It builds so nicely on your comment about, like, it's not just about technical skills, but the Peter Principle, it's actually how we open our leadership class at the business school. And the leadership principle, the Peter Principle says that people get promoted to their level of incompetence, and then they stay there for the rest of their life. And it sounds terrible, right? So it sounds like you get promoted until you're just no longer able to do your job. And one of the reasons for why this oftentimes happens is that you come in as a young person, right? Think of like someone in the IT industry. So you come in, you're very good at coding. Maybe you're a great software developer. You can make beautiful websites. You come in, you're great at your job. You have the technical skills. You get promoted. And then again, maybe you just need technical skills. You get promoted again. At some point, the skills that you need is actually managing other people, because you can only code, say, one website at a time. If you successfully manage a team of 10 people, you're much, much better off. So this shift from I just need to be good at my technical skills to I need to be good at managing people is something that we're oftentimes not trained for, right? We just get promoted through the hierarchy of organization. The role is gradually shifting, but nobody takes it to the side to explain how this stuff works. So I think it's like whenever you talk to people about like the soft skills and they're like, oh, soft skills, why do they matter? Like Peter Principle is like such a good answer, because you're going to get stuck somewhere and you're much, much better off. You're much more productive. You're much more prolific if you can get people behind the ideas and the visions that you have.
We've had a program for 15 years, Sandra, called the Link to Leadership program. And that program is designed for early career managers that went from a technical role into management. It's also for people that are in highly technical roles and have done well that want to get into management. Because what a lot of people don't realize when they get to that fork in the road where I'm going to stay technical or I'll go into management / leadership, and the two things are different. The skills to be successful in management leadership are radically different than in a technical role. And often in most organizations I've found over 30 years, there's no training program. There's nothing. You've done well in the technical, off you go. And then they're asked, go and hire a bunch of people and lead them without any training. And, think about that. Would you throw me in a highly technical role without some background training? No. So we've been doing that for years ourselves, and it's
So how
fascinating.
did you get started with the program? Because
Well,
I totally agree that most organizations don't do it.
yeah, well, so we have an organization called Think IT. It's an association. We don't charge anything for it, and it's designed for IT professionals, primarily for leaders. And we have a board of advisors. And it was one of the CIOs that said 15 years ago, we need a program like this. It doesn't exist. So it was created by IT practitioners, by a bunch of chief technology and chief information officers and senior level people. So they put the curriculum together and they teach it. So these are hands-on, and it's a brilliant program. On the very first session I actually teach, and it's called Know Thyself. So it's a lot about, and I use DISC as the tool. There's many tools like profiling tools, as you well know. DISC is the one that we use. But here's the problem, in my not so humble opinion again, because I've got lots of not so humble opinions. The problem with things like DISC and program, they're great to a point because it's all dependent on your inputs. Now, if you feel as though you're supposed to have a certain profile, I can tell you half a dozen people in my company that guessed on what profile they were supposed to have. So their entries spit out a profile that they're really not. So how effective is that? Anyway, so going back to it, so they created this thing and teach it, and we've been doing it for years and years and years now, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive because what it does for most people, a light bulb goes on for them. Oh, crap. There's a lot of things I need to learn to be a successful leader. Now, what's really interesting to me, Sandra, I work with most of the people I work with are the C-level. And what's really interesting is technologists at the C-level, they have a combination of technical skills, but the reason they got there has got nothing to do with their technical skills, zero. It's all to do with their interpersonal skills. Now, let me just add to what you said earlier about interpersonal skills. I like what you said in terms of, situational awareness and empathy and all those things, but it's also political awareness. And because in my book, I wrote about the most successful people, they understand this concept. It's about sharing the right information. I'll say this slowly because I can talk too fast. Sharing the right information with the right people at the right time in the right way. Because what a lot of people do is they don't grasp that concept, and the ego gets in their way and they want to be right. And they'll beat their chest in the wrong situation. They'll piss somebody off and they'll get fired. And I'm not even exaggerating. I've seen that happen so many times. People with very, very good interpersonal skills and high EQ, they understand the flow of information is of paramount importance for success. And it's not about them being right. It's about what's right for the organization. Because I think that's one of the flaws as humans. We all like to be right, don't we? We like to be right. And often that can get us in trouble by sharing the wrong information or sharing the right information with the wrong people at the wrong time in the wrong way. That's what's complex about the world.
But you're so right. I think what we know from a lot of research by now, I think just networks matter a lot, right? And there's like the saying that I really like is the further you get in your career, the more who you know matters than what you know. And I think this is like exactly what you just mentioned. And it's hard for my feeling with incoming MBA students, it's hard for them to grasp because they were trained, right? So they were, for the last 10 years, they were just trained to be good at what they do,
right?
Technically. And now they kind of have to shift, and they kind of there has to be like this shift in like their mindset of like, okay, first of all, I don't have to do everything myself. That I think and I don't have to know everything. We always want to be right. And like, I think when you're still early on in your career, we also have this perception of, well, if I'm the person running this group, I should be the one who knows everything. So I don't want to be seen as like incompetent, or maybe I'm a little bit insecure. But ideally, right? Ideally, you're the leader of a team where everybody is smarter than you and they know stuff that you don't know, and vice versa. But it's really hard for, I think, young professionals to make that shift in mindset.
And I want to dig deeper into mindset, specifically for senior leaders, but that will have to wait until part 2 of our talk. Also, coming up next time, Sandra Matz and I will discuss the importance of genuine curiosity.
I think curiosity drives so much of, if I'm like genuinely curious about who you are, where you come from, what you want, that then creates perspective taking, it creates empathy, it creates compassion. So I feel like this base level of being curious about other people is driving so many of the good other traits that come with it.
This has been Relationship Equity. If you want to take your career, your business, or your personal relationships to the next level, reach out to Richard at yorksolutions.net. You can also get Richard's book, Relationship Equity, your cornerstone investment to great gains in business and life, on Amazon now. Relationship Equity with Richard Walker is a production of Forbes Books.